Hey, folks, welcome back to another Utah County Republican Party official podcast. I'm your host and the party vice chair. I'm Charles Max Wood, and I am here with Nikki Brammer. Now, Nikki and I have been talking a bit about the school board split, so we thought, hey, let's get on and talk about it so people understand it, because I've been talking to some of my neighbors, and they're just like, do we need a split, and why, and what's going to happen? And so you seem to know a bit more about it than I do, so let's just dive in. You want to introduce yourself real quick, though? Let people know who you are and what your background is.
Sure. My name's Nicki Brammer. I live in Highland. I've been very involved with the Republican Party over the year. I was actually the chair of the state Republican convention this past year, and I've been the communications chair in previous years. I was on the steering committee for the Utah County Republican Party, coincidentally over the education area. And during the time, it took an interesting twist. Instead of just educating Republicans, we also started taking a look closer at the education around us in Utah County, the Alpine School District. So, we've been looking at a lot of issues, and our primary concern has always been just delivering quality education, supporting teachers, and seeing how we can do that better.
Yep, absolutely. You're talking about delivering quality education and supporting teachers. And 2 years ago, I ran for school board out here in Lehi, Alpine School Board. And it was funny because people were like, well, because I kept talking about outcomes for students, and people were like, well, you're not talking about the teachers. And I'm like, we can't do it without the teachers, right? I mean, I am talking about them, but yeah, my primary concern is what's the outcome we're getting for the students. But like I said, you can't do it without taking care of the teachers. And so, yeah, there's kind of this holistic discussion that you have as far as like, what are the programs, what resources are you providing, what teachers are there, what are you providing them? And so as we kind of dive into that, can you just kind of explain in a nutshell how you see Proposition 11 or Proposition 14 if you're out in Saratoga Springs or Eagle Mountain? In fact, maybe we ought to set a little more context. So Proposition 11 is to split Alpine School District. Why don't you explain it? I could, but I'll let you do it.
Well, actually, and that's a really good segue. It's important to know, what does Prop 11 ask? Prop 11 on your ballots will say, shall a new school district be created from the Alpine School District in the cities of Lehi, Highland, American Fork, Alpine, Cedar Hills, and the portion of Draper that is in Utah County. Okay, so that's a really important distinction, because it's not just saying, should we have an Alpine School District split? And we can come back to that issue later, but it really is about creating a new government, a school district government that we believe will better serve the student needs and the teachers and our schools here. And same thing in Prop 14. It has a very similar question, very similar wording that says, shall a new school district be created from the Alpine School District in the cities of Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs, Cedar Fort, and Fairfield, and then some of the unincorporated areas out there. And basically, it's really important for voters to understand that, because the goal is always focused on better serving the needs of students and those local communities.
Yep, absolutely. So let's just dive in, because I've had some people ask, okay, so are we better off or not? And
yes,
I think that's an open-ended question, but it kind of lets you start where you think, I guess, the most bang for the buck is.
Okay. There are some primary issues that we focus on with this. Number one is representation. Okay. Right. Currently, the Alpine School District serves over 425,000 residents. It also serves about 85,000 students. Over time, as we've been growing, we haven't increased the number of board members, which means that each person's representation for your board member has been diluted over time. And that's important, because how does the public, how do our taxpayers, how do our parents communicate the needs or our desires for our school district if our school board member is representing 60,810 residents, right? I mean, that's really hard. The typical school board member on average, just running averages, is representing 12 to 14 schools. So you think about, how does an individual represent 12 to 14 schools? That's school community council meetings, PTA meetings, meetings with the administration, calls from parents. It's really difficult. And we want to have this synergistic relationship between the governed and the government. And so when those representation ratios get off, it's just really hard to have a functioning system. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to chime in because when I ran, for example, my area that I was running in, the representation was about double. I had about double the size of a Utah House of Representatives seat that I was running in. Right. And so you look at the legislature, right? You have less representation on the school board than you do in the House of Representatives for the state of Utah. Another thing is that you're talking about the number of schools they represent, but if you look at the way that they actually divvy things up on the board, and of course I had plans to tell them I wasn't going to play that way, but what they do is they say, well, you've got these high school clusters, right? So you have the high schools, and then you've got the junior highs that feed into them, and then the elementary schools that feed into those junior highs and middle schools. And each school board member is assigned one or two of the high schools, because there are 11 high schools, and there are 7 board seats in Alpine School District. And so basically you have one school board member representing 1 or 2 high schools. Yeah. And it's just a lot.
Yeah. Well, and right now, I'm giving you numbers with averages, but when we actually start looking at how different the areas are from the east to the west in the Alpine School District, those representation ratios get really lopsided. So for instance, prior to redistricting, you had 1 school board member on the west side. Julie King was a school board member over there, and she was superhuman in what she was doing. She worked so hard. She represented 22 schools individually. It's incredible. And she did a good job, but we can't expect that, and we're paying our school board members like pennies for their time. Yeah. So if we step away for a minute from just running those average numbers to say, hey, each person's representing too many, let's look at what school board members represent from the east side to the west side. Okay. So Julie King, after redistricting, I think she is on record, she's representing about 14,000 students where she serves. Joylyn Lincoln, she represents 15,117 students. Okay. Now there is explosive growth out there. Those numbers go up all the time. On the other hand, let's look at the east side of the district. You have Ada Wilson. She represents Orem and Vineyard. She represents 7,305 students. That's less than half what Joy Lincoln is representing. Look at Sarah Hacken. She represents Orem, and especially North Orem. She's representing about 9,300 students. Okay, now here's where it gets really tricky, because the way that we district for school board seats is not based on students. And that's a big reason why we have this lopsided nature of representation. Out in the East, you have a lot of voters. You have college voters, it's based on population. It's not even based on voter registrations. So you have a lot of older two-person households without children. And so those numbers go up. So you have a majority on the east side versus you have a minority on the west side, where you have all the young population growth. You have a lot of, multiple children households over in the west with only 2 parents. So that is where a lot of the challenges have come in the representation in the Alpine School District. We started to see really this chasm in needs and what each area is desperately asking for. And then in 2022, when there was a bond run and it failed, that kind of put everybody into a dire situation. And so now we've been in a place for the last 2 years where we haven't been able to fund schools on the West that were planned for and that were promised. In the East, we have declining student enrollments, which means that they have smaller schools and smaller class sizes. And we saw in Prop 2, there is a community discussion out there where there are some people in the community that say, yes, close our schools. Like, we want to have more efficiency. We're okay having over 1,000 students. But then there's other members of their community that say, no, we really like having small class sizes. We have yearned for small class sizes. We believe that small class sizes are better for our students and our teachers, and we're willing to pay for those. And so in a lot of
just to give people a little bit of context, when you said Prop 2, what you mean is the proposition that was on the ballot in 2022 to split Orem off as its own school district. And so this conversation is the one that's happening within Orem as far as how they run those schools in that city.
Yeah. So thanks for highlighting that. So anyway, so you kind of watch that conversation play out. And, we really didn't get involved in that. We recognized, that's an Orem City issue a couple of years ago. However, just watching that and just listening to that, we actually learned a lot. You had board member Ada Wilson who said, hey, just so you know, community, here in Orem, we actually get a lot more than we give. There were ads going out that said for every $1 that Orem was paying, we get $8.75 back. She talked about how, where they have low student enrollments, they actually get money from the West Side higher WPU. Now that we've been looking at this, she talked about how Title I funding is supplemented. There are 40% of Title I students on the West Side. There's only one Title I school out there. But over in Orem, there's 8 Title I schools. And that's because the Alpine School District has been reallocating some of those Title I funds from the West Side over to the East Side to supplement them. So basically, a lot came out 2 years ago, and when all the different city councils started hearing, how much more money is going to Orem, and really considering what our cities have been waiting for, what our cities have been needing. We've been looking at how the Alpine School District is closing programs in the central area specifically. They just started to look very seriously at the possibility of, is it time to close, to divide the district and have new districts that can better meet the needs?
Right. So I'm going to just clarify one other term that you used, and that's the WPU. It's the weighted pupil unit. In a nutshell, it gets a little more complicated than this, but in a nutshell, it's the amount of money allocated to a student by the state government to pay for that student's education, and is given to the school district or the charter school that they attend.
Yeah. Can I actually just add to that? School funding is very tricky, but it's really important to understand. And basically there's 3 buckets of funding. So the lion's share of funding comes from the state legislature. It comes in at about 62 or 63% based on that WPU, or that weighted pupil unit, basically saying, if you have students, we're going to pay you money per student. And so that's a really good way to make sure funding follows the student and lands where it needs operationally. The second bucket is through property taxes. So those are assessed through your county. The Alpine School District basically says, this is what we want to bring in through taxes. So just this past August, we had a truth in taxation where the Alpine School District held a hearing. They said what they were proposing to raise the tax rates. There were about 84 local residents that stood up and spoke out. And then at the end of it, they held a vote and they voted unanimously to raise our taxes. So the property taxes are directly going to our school district as well. The third bucket is the federal government, and they basically send about 9% of our revenues to us. And those are typically focused on Title I funds, SPED funding, free lunch. And those funds always follow specific students. And so it's really important to understand that, when we start hearing some people express doubts that programs are going to end or we won't have funding for different things. Well, for SPED programs or for Title I.
SPED is special ed, by the way, if you're listening and not catching the jargon.
Thanks for helping with the jargon, but those dollars are going to follow those students. And so it's really important. I hope that clarifies how we fund education. 3 different buckets: state legislature based on, per pupil, per student funding, property taxes, those go into operational general fund, and then federal money comes in directed at specific programs.
Right. And so one argument that I guess would be in favor of Prop 11 or Prop 14 would be that the money we collect in property tax and the money we get from things like Title I, which is generally income based, the special ed programs, all that stuff, would stay more locally in our area because we're a smaller district.
Yeah. So really important to differentiate again, though. Your income taxes are funding through that WPU.
Yes.
In fact, on your ballots right now, Amendment A speaks about that income tax earmark. And so, so financially, we've had various feasibility studies. We've had the Alpine School District study different options, different ways to divide the Alpine School District. And you know what, the consulting firm out of Florida who did those studies, it was really interesting to watch those studies presented, and they didn't know a lot about our specific funding. They didn't know a lot about our specific laws that help us fund education, because we do it really differently here in Utah. But they did come back and say all of the options they studied were feasible. They were viable. There were some problems with the MGT study, and I hope people know that. I hope they followed up.
MGT is another firm, right?
Yeah, that's the consulting firm that was out of Florida that the Alpine School District paid $200,000 to come and look at the different options. But there were some challenges they had just because they weren't familiar with how we fund. In one case in their study, they actually used student enrollments from one year, and they used tax rates on another. And so the ASD business manager had to come back a couple weeks later. He needed to correct those finances. Another problem in the MGT study, at one point, they didn't count students in Vineyard because Vineyard doesn't have a high school. So they said there were 0 high school students, but really they are high school students who live in.
They just go to Mountain View High School. They
go to a high school in a different city. So there were some challenges with that study. In Prop 11 and Prop 14, we used an independent finance firm. Lewis Robertson Birmingham is a public finance advisor. They are very well respected in Utah, and they came in. They looked at both propositions, and they analyzed it based on general fund expenditures, capital projects, debt service. And in the case of Prop 11, they said, this is viable and important to know. And this is one of our kind of rally cries, is that if we pass Prop 11 and create a new central school district, we are likely to see a tax savings relative to
no way
in the ASD. Yeah. Well, and that's, and that's really important. Okay. And she qualifies that. She says, I want everyone to know, I am not saying that taxes will go down.
Right.
Okay. And I don't know anybody who thinks that they would go down. Inflation is going up. However, the comparison of what we would pay compared to staying in the Alpine School District, when we become our own central school district with Lehi, Highland, Alpine, Cedar Hills, Draper, American Fork, we would have a tax savings paying less taxes than we would if we stay in Alpine School District. And I want people to really understand that distinction. And to that note, I personally don't have a problem paying more taxes when I know they will land in my community. And that's really what we're after right now. Living in the central area, our taxes have been going to pay for $180 million schools on the west side, which I support because they desperately need them. But we've also been paying $1,500 to $2,500 more per student down in Orem. because they have smaller schools and smaller class sizes. So you can see that when we have our own school district where we don't have the high need to be building these very expensive schools like the West Side, and we also don't have small class sizes where we have to subsidize them like we do in the East, we have a very healthy 3% moderate growth rate here up in the central area. And all of those taxes will continue to fund our area. We'll have a tax savings. Also, here's a really important point, and this is maybe the next step to talk about. The Alpine School, funding capital building projects in Utah, the best way to do it in education is to run general obligation bonds. Okay.
Oh, you went right where I was headed. Right. I was going to ask this question, so go ahead.
I know, and I hope that I can communicate this well, because this is like the driest, most boring thing to talk about, right? But the public has to understand. Bonding is how we expect to pay for schools. We have the highest bond rating. It means that we can get the best rates. We can get the best bang for our buck. We pay those back. And so that's what we always want to do. We want to use general obligation bonds, which require the public to support them. Our Constitution requires that the public says, we are willing to take this debt upon our community, and we support this. We have a vote. And if the public says no, then we don't get to take out those bonds. Okay.
Well, the thing is the reason is because when we take on that debt, then we have to service the debt. We have to pay for it, year after year until it's paid off. And if we can't pay for that out of our, I guess, general budget, then we have to do things like raise taxes. And so our taxes will go to paying for this bond. And they can't obligate us to that without our consent, essentially.
Yeah. Well, and so it's important to know the last time the Alpine School District passed a general obligation bond was in 2016. Okay.
So 8 years ago.
Yeah, 8 years ago.
And don't they generally run for 10 years?
10 to 15 years. They can choose how long those rates go. We really should have run a bond in 2020. If you talk to Julie King, who's the Alpine School District board member on the West Side, she said, I wanted to run it in 2020, but we had COVID and the board decided, hey, we don't know what's going on. We're not going to run a bond. Understandable. Okay. But 2020, hindsight, we should have run a bond in 2020. So going back to, we haven't passed a bond since 2016. The 2022 bond failed for a variety of reasons. One of which I believe is because it was just too large for our fiscally conservative public in Utah County. And, we believe that by dividing into smaller districts, we can run smaller bonds, which the community will know those are going to land in my smaller local area. And we're going to see those effects right now. In the 2022 bond, if you looked at how those votes came down, the West almost entirely supported the bonds. They said, we know this is for our schools. Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs, and Lehi supported those. And every other city to the east did not support them. Okay. And to me, that says, if people don't feel like they're getting a return on that increase, then they're not going to support bonds. Alternatively, this is why we believe that by having smaller districts, we will be able to run bonds. In our area, while we can't pass a $600 million bond, I think that a $200 million bond that says, hey, we're going to rebuild AF High School in central area. Well, that community knows that that school has seismically unsafe problems. It has unreinforced masonry. It's been on the list for years. And the community would say, yeah, we have friends that go there. We have family that goes there. We go there frequently. Let's rebuild that school and let's do it well and let's do it quickly. So that's where I believe that bonding will improve. If you look at another school district split, a lot of times people will bring up the Jordan Canyon split for a variety of reasons. And we do look at that. We look at that as a warning. We look at that for lessons learned. How can we avoid those? One thing that I found fascinating that I learned recently is that after Canyon School District became their own district, they were able to run 2 tax neutral bonds and rebuild 12 of their schools. And by the way,
Wow.
they have only raised taxes twice over in the school district. And so you look at how you can be more efficient. A nice thing with bonding currently, because we talked about how general obligation bonds will run for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. There are bonds that will be dropping off our payments very soon.
Right.
And so that's another way that in the central area, if we run a bond and time it correctly, when those past general obligation bonds from 2016 drop off, well, guess what? We just run a new bond to fill in that gap. And we don't feel like our taxes are being raised. I mean, I would love to return that to voters, but we do need to rebuild our schools.
Yeah, they're real needs for sure.
Yeah. We have growth that's happening out in Lehi. And so, again, we are not afraid to pay for public education. We're not afraid to pay for our buildings, but we want to do it in a smart way. And so everybody should know that when our general obligation bonds start dropping off in 2026, our school district doesn't even start until 2027.
2027, right.
And so that's another way that our claim of tax savings, is true. So
now, is that the last bond that Alpine has, or are there other ones that we're still that are gonna carry over one way or the other?
No, I believe that there are bonds. I'll have to look up the table. There, once upon a time, I did see a table that showed kind of how they were layered and how they drop off at different periods. But to be honest, and let's give credit to the Alpine School Board and the past manager. Rob Smith was a magician.
Yeah,
he did amazing things, right?
Yeah.
And it's brilliant the way that bonding has worked. It's fantastic. We should all be proud that we have such a high bond rating. And rather than not go through general obligation bonds, we should demand that we use them and we use them when we need them.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So, I think you've made all the points that I was thinking, just in general, hey, look, there are different needs for different parts of the district. We're going to bond out for different reasons than, say, people in the West, in Saratoga Springs and Eagle Mountain. We're going to bond out for different reasons than folks in like Orem and Linden and Pleasant Grove. And that's essentially why the bond, in my opinion, didn't pass, is just like you said, people were seeing the bond. It was a huge amount. And people weren't excited about taking on that level of debt and then not seeing it come home and pay off where they live. I'm kind of curious. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say another thing that we probably need to talk about is that, when we talk about being able to have smaller districts that will better serve student needs, we really believe that. There is a claim by the opposition that if we have a smaller school district than Alpine, the largest school district in Utah, the claim is that we will lose student programs and student services.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because let me give you a little bit of context here. One of them is so my sister, she's since moved out of the state, but when they had the Proposition 2 on the ballot in Orem, some of her kids had some speech delays and things like that. And so she was mostly very interested in the special ed programs. And then I have other friends who have kids in like the gifted programs or dual language programs or things like that. And I've heard a couple of people say these programs are going to go away, but then I've heard other people essentially say, well, the way that we've had to allocate funds, we've had to close programs anyway. So what do we believe here?
Okay. So I did want to address that. So the claim is false, and it is hard to say 100% because so many of these decisions will fall to a future school board.
Right.
However, Alpine School District is the largest district in Utah. If they are true in saying that a smaller school district than Alpine will have to close programs, they won't be able to continue these programs. Well, what about every other school district in Utah? What about number 2, number 3, number 4, number 10 I mean, we look around at other school districts in Utah, and there are so many successful, high-performing school districts that are providing excellent programs, and they are meeting student needs.
So is there a school district that's kind of comparable in size to what the Central School District would be?
Yeah, Canyons is probably very similar.
Okay.
We would be number 6, and we would be larger than Canyons. Now, if you look at Canyons, they are very well respected. They have fantastic programs. They're doing amazing things. And so you brought up a few programs, DLI, dual language immersion. You brought up gifted programs. You brought up SPED programs. Many of us in the Central School District began advocating hard for this because our favorite programs have been on the chopping block over the past year alone. Okay, so in December 23 and January 24, the Alpine School District announced that they were going to redistribute, was their word, which meant they were going to close the elementary gifted programs at Westfield Elementary in Alpine and Cedar Ridge Elementary in Cedar Hills. And they were going to close those and move them across the district. Well, we had 100 parents show up and say, you can't close these programs because our children have tested and qualified. They've been identified as gifted students. The reason that we have these two programs are because Highland Elementary is a magnet gifted school. And that program is always full because students come here from elsewhere that don't have the program. And so there was a huge public outcry. And ultimately, the Alpine School District said, okay, we're going to pause this for now. Okay. And so we felt like that was a success. However, we know that that was just a pause. We have no promises that they won't, redistribute those elsewhere. Also, so, my job, my volunteer service, I'm the president of the Utah Association of Gifted Children. So I actually talk a lot with gifted students and teachers. I received a teacher email this week where the teacher said, hey, I'm in Alpine. There's this program I've used for years. It's a project-based learning program. And I'm being told that I can't do it anymore. And I asked why, because I've done it before. And they said that they don't have the budget. Alpine is slashing the budget by $50,000 to the gifted program. Okay, so that's an example. Like Alpine is not promising to keep those programs open right now. If you look over on the east side, they're trying to close Linden, which has a gifted program. They're also trying to close Windsor, which has a very successful dual language immersion program. And so, the claim that if we split into smaller districts, programs will end, we have a twofold answer. Number one is Alpine is closing those programs now. And the second part is if our community wants them and prioritizes them, we can work through our newly elected school board and say, we want you to prioritize this and we'll support it. There are some crazy statements too. I keep hearing, in American Fork in our area that the marching band program is going to go away. And it's like, no, that is complete. That is complete fear mongering. Why would the marching band program go away? That is, supported by the school. You have booster parents that pay for it. And so, a lot of these claims that programs and services will go away are just false. I personally would advocate for programs that parents and students need and want. I believe that our community highly values us. We move into the central area because there's programs that we like. And so, I would challenge anybody that thinks that a program is going to go away or certain student services to go away to come talk to us. Let's find a way that the funding can continue. I believe we will have more funding when we're not sending, $1,500 to $2,500 per student to Orem. We will have money to support our student programs.
Yeah. So I'm wondering a little bit too, though, and this kind of harkens back a little bit to the discussion we had about the bonds. Is some of this just down to the school district felt like they could fund some things out of the bond that now they're just having to budget for because they couldn't pass the bond? Or does this have really nothing to do with whether or not the bond passed, that they're cutting these programs?
Oh, I think because the bond didn't pass, that's a large reason why they are closing schools and cutting programs.
Right.
A lot of their budget right now to build is coming out of their general fund. The general fund is what funds our operating costs.
Right.
And so, the tax increases that were voted on in August, those tax increments would normally go into the general fund, but they have said that they're going to put those toward building school on the west side. Right. So absolutely, again, because that bond failed, they're needing to use general fund for building, and they're trying to cut budgets elsewhere.
Right. I wanted to make sure that folks understood, right? The school board's not closing these programs because they want to close programs. They're closing these programs because they've got a really delicate balancing act to do with the money, and so they've got to figure it out. Yeah,
absolutely. Can we talk for just a minute about teachers?
Yeah. So that was another one that, and I know I've heard different things from like it's funny because you keep preempting my questions, but
okay. I know we didn't really talk about how this would go.
Yeah, no, we didn't, but that's fine. I mean, it just means that you're on top of the issues, and yeah, these are some of the concerns that I'm hearing too. So just to give a little bit of context, my sister teaches kindergarten out in Saratoga Springs. My mom teaches math at Lehi High School, right? And so they hear rumors too, and it's been interesting to hear what they're hearing as opposed to what I'm hearing, with the people that I talk to, and what some of my neighbors are hearing or not hearing based on where they're at. And so some folks, a lot of the teachers that I've talked to or that have talked to, that I'm hearing from my mom or my sister, they really just don't know, right? They don't know whether this is going to be good for them or not. Other people are essentially saying this is going to be really bad for the teachers. Or I've also heard that this is going to be really good for teachers in Central District. It's probably going to be fine for teachers in the Western District. And then in what's left of Alpine, it's not going to be so hot. And then I've heard that it's just bad all around because the Alpine School District, being as big as it is, can just take better care of the teachers. So yeah, again, what do we believe? What do we need to know?
Okay, so that was a really good summary of everything that's being said everywhere.
Yeah.
I would lead out by saying, every city council unanimously supported putting these options for new school districts in Central and West on the ballot, because as they studied it, they believed this would be better for students and teachers. You have every legislator in these areas strongly supporting these new districts. Right. You have many county leaders that live up here that know the areas. And so you have so many school board members from the state, from the local Alpine School District in the past. I don't see any possible way that all of those people would ever let it not do well, not succeed.
Right.
Okay. And we value teachers. We value education. There is no way on earth that we have new school districts and, we let teachers be heard in this. Okay. So I will say that to begin with, we are committed to protecting teachers. There was a law passed in the last legislative session. It was SB 221. One of the provisions in that said that for 1 year, teacher salaries would be protected. Okay. And so for that first year, which means, new school districts wouldn't even start until fall of 2027. So you would count that first year, 2027 to 2028. Teacher salaries would be protected from being changed. And then the new school district, the next year, would begin taking part in those negotiations and figuring out how they can attract all the top talent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so this is where those of us, myself included, that believe that having 3 school districts who are all competing to attract the top teaching talent
Right.
would offer better compensation.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that competitive markets typically drive up salaries and or benefits.
Right.
Also, we don't talk a lot about how different these school districts will be, but they're going to be very different. That's why we're
Mm-hmm.
dividing off into different things. The East will likely continue to have small class sizes. How many teachers would like to teach in a smaller class? There's a lot that have said that would be great for them. So maybe that's an option, and maybe teachers that would like to have smaller class sizes go over there. Maybe teachers who don't mind the class size, who are willing to have larger class sizes, and the higher WPU, the higher funding that would go to the west side, maybe they're able to offer higher salaries over there. So maybe you have younger teachers or teachers that are wanting higher salaries. Maybe they go over there and they say, I'm willing to have 37, 38 kids in my class, and I'm going to be compensated for that. Up in the central area, we may raise salaries. We may, offer different benefits. But so that's how I see that going. I know the people who have been in the school board from up here. I believe that we want to reward our teachers. We want to say, we love you. We appreciate you. Thank you for educating my kids, and we will continue to support them.
Yeah.
So the people that, and I would say this too, I think it's a great thing that teachers love working for Alpine. And I would like to give credit to Alpine School District for creating a great environment for teachers. I think that should be applauded. And so I understand them being concerned about who comes next in these new school districts. But again, that's where I say, let's maintain our institutional knowledge. Most of the schools will continue to have the same employees, the same administrators, unless they choose to transfer themselves. But the way that the school district split would be governed is that when we have new districts, the schools would continue with the same employees moving forward, unless employees specifically have asked to change. And why would an employee ask to change? Well, maybe they live out on the west side and their kids attend west schools, and so they want to make sure they're always on the same schedule, and so they might ask to transfer. And so that is an area where the school district has said they're going to try to be responsive. They obviously can't honor all of those, and so that'll be a tricky situation, and it's one that we'll just have to see how those teachers shake down at that time. But there are some teacher issues. We don't see the populace not supporting teachers moving forward.
Right.
We see it as, hey, we're a smaller district now. Let's lean in. Let's support more. Let's let you know that we're engaged and we're watching.
Yeah. Yeah. I would just chime in here too. So with my background, I was on the board of Odyssey Charter School, which is in American Fork. And I mean, our primary focus was student outcomes, but we recognized that it was the teachers that were primarily responsible for getting us those outcomes. And so a lot of times, we were talking about programs and things that we did, we've kind of talked through a lot of that, but when it came down to it, we were all often talking about how do we make sure that our great teachers are delighted to stay with us. Right. And when teachers left, we were having the conversation of, okay, well, why did they go? And typically it was because they got offered a better salary and benefits somewhere else that we just couldn't match. Right. Is why typically we would lose teachers, or they would retire or something. Yeah. And so
we've been trying to ask teachers, come to the table, tell us what can we. I know that Julie King has received feedback that, the 1 year protection of salary, doesn't necessarily do it for them. And so
I've had my sister said that to me, actually.
Yeah. And so she's actually opened a bill file. She's working with Senator Grover. She is planning to address that in legislation during the next legislative session, which would be well before any new districts begin in 2027. I just heard, I think last night there was a teacher that I was kind of communicating with back and forth that said, the 1 year salary protection, that doesn't do anything for me. And, what about paid time off? And, we
Right.
want that maintained. We don't want to lose that. And, I think that's valid. So let's look at that. I don't see why we can't have that carry over. And so like things like that, we would love to have more feedback. Like we just need the teachers to come and talk to us. Julie King is on top of those. She's working to get that into legislation. We truly want to hold teachers harmless. We want to understand their concerns. We've all been through corporate restructures. I've been through corporate restructures. I know that brings up a lot of angst for everyone. And so if we can help them to feel more comfortable, to know that we're trying to meet their needs, we definitely want to.
Yeah. So this kind of leads into another thing that I wanted to just talk through was, because when I was talking to my sister, it was, well, after that 1 year, then it's up to your new school board, right? Because they will be your new employer. And so what does that transition look like, right? What does it look like as far as, hey, we're going to start the new school year in 2027. So what's the process as we head into that so that, teachers or parents or, other stakeholders, right, that care about how the school district is going to operate and how they take care of the facilities and how they take care of the kids and how they take care of the teachers. How does that all get spun up so that in 27, when we start the new school year, everybody's on board and knows what the plan is?
Okay, great question. Let's talk about the timeline first. So we are voting in November 2024, to create these new school districts.
Right.
If approved, then we would have 1 year, and next November 2025, we would have elections for the new school boards.
Okay.
And this is really important to clarify. If any proposition passes, if the West Side passes and ours doesn't, Alpine School District still goes away. It would be dissolved. Right. Okay. And it's important to understand that it's a protective measure because what we saw in the Jordan Canyons school district split is that Canyons created their new school district, but Jordan was kind of left holding the bag of debt. They lost a third of their students and the funding that goes with them, but they still had all of the debt. They had all of the contracts, the companies that had contracts.
Oh yeah, that's a mess.
They don't just say, oh, I see you lost a third of your district, we're going to let you back out of those. No, they still had to pay them. And so that's why, the SB 221 had this provision that if any school district split occurs, if any new district is taken out of Alpine goes away. It's completely dissolved. Okay.
Right.
And the remaining areas that did not choose to become a new school district proactively will automatically become a reorganized district. They'll be reorganized together, and they would still have school district or school board elections next November as well. And so that's important to understand. So if Prop 14 passes next November, they will have an election for 7 school board members over there. If Prop 11 passes, we get a new school board. 7 members all live inside our city. And then also next November, Linden, Orem, Vineyard, and PG, they would also become that reorganized district. They would get to have elections to choose their next 7-member school board. Okay. So November 2025, those new school boards are elected. And then January 2026, those school board members would begin their work. Okay. So January of 2026, they would probably start working on choosing a superintendent, hiring a superintendent. Over the next year and a half, essentially, they are starting to work with Alpine School District to figure out how they're dividing up the assets, who gets what. Alpine School District still works. It is still entirely
it's still a thing until
together. Yeah, they're working with these school boards, trying to divide those assets equitably and making sure that everything is going. And then the new school district, in July of 2027, those school boards and school districts would begin operating and students would start in August of 2027. Right. It's really important to note this is 1 year more than the Jordan Canyons split had. And so you can see that on-ramp is a little bit longer. It provides for a little bit more study and work together. I think it will help the transition to be smoother.
Right. Makes sense. I'm assuming then that like property tax rates and everything else basically stay the same. And
I think that the new school boards would assess the first property tax rates.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of their work.
Right. So the new school boards get elected in 2025. And so it sounds like they start, I guess, not operating the schools, but they start kind of ramping up and, like you said, hiring a superintendent and stuff in 2026. And so, yeah, any concerns that need to be addressed could be brought to them at that point, correct?
Yeah. Well, and, one of the cost-cutting ways that we've talked about is shared service agreements. Right. And so where all of these new school boards would begin in January 2026, and they would be really focused on their individual areas, but that would be the time period, they'd have almost 2 years where they recognize, hey, we don't have a bus depot in the central area. However, there's a bus depot on the east side and there's a bus depot on the west side.
Yep.
And those have currently been providing bus routes for us. So rather than us building a new bus depot in Central, can we just create a shared service agreement and contract those same bus routes, and we'll pay you. Right. We'll give you a revenue stream. And that way it saves us from having to build a huge bus depot, but we're still paying for those. Same thing with like printing services in the Central District, for instance. We currently have the Alpine School District printing services, and it has the capacity to do all of the printing for all 92 of our schools. Plus, it has the capacity to provide printing for the entire Provo School District. It does that now. Plus, a whole bunch of charter schools in the area. And so when we, looking at our costs during that period, we'd be like, we don't need to limit that. We have capacity. Let's create some shared service agreement. Let the West District know. Let the Southeast District know. If you want to continue, contracting print services with us, we're happy to do that because we know we have capacity. And that would become a revenue stream that currently we're not enjoying, but in the future we will. And so there's a lot of things like that currently are unaccounted for. They would provide additional revenue streams, and they would enable us to not have to pay, duplication or triplification of everything. And so that period between January of 2026 and starting in July of 2027, there's going to be a lot of those issues that come up, and there's going to be a lot of conversations between the districts. And I really appreciate that there is a long ramp to have those conversations and make sure that this is being done equitably and intelligently. I have faith in the future school boards to do that well.
Right. That makes sense. I'm trying to think what other objections I've heard.
So let's one more shared service agreement, if I can. If I can. One of the concerns of teachers is they talk about their retirement, and it's important to know that everybody's retirement is saved in Utah retirement system, regardless of what district they go to. That is maintained for all the teachers. And so whether they're in the central area, the Alpine School District, the West, Canyons, Utah retirement systems holds their retirement safe for them. Okay. Secondarily, Alpine has been able to provide some really outstanding additional retirement bonuses. And so there's one, it's called like an early retirement bonus. And there's a legitimate concern that some teachers who have paid into that, who would be planning to basically, it kind of incentivizes teachers to leave 5 years early, and they get like a big bonus. And they're planning on that. And they think, well, if I'm in a new district, I will lose that because the new district doesn't have that. In fact, Alpine doesn't even offer that anymore because it was such a great retirement bonus. Julie King actually did a lot of work on this. And she said, we absolutely should honor that commitment. So many
people absolutely
on that. And I don't know who wouldn't want to honor that. And so her observation is, I think we could do that. First of all, the fund is almost fully funded. So she looks at that and says, well, if we were to have each district appoint 2 new school board members and the business manager to a committee, they would just need to meet, periodically and agree on those disbursements until the last teacher who is due that receives their retirement bonus. And so there's things like that where, that period from January 2026 until we start, there's really important issues. We can create shared service agreements. And there is also an argument where people say, well, if we're doing so many shared service agreements, what's the point of dividing? And again, we have to go back. The point of dividing is because we have such different student needs across the area, and we are no longer able to meet them all as one entire district. And so it makes sense to come together where we can, and where we can provide cost cutting and savings. And it makes sense to have, our own government districts to meet our own student needs and teacher needs.
Yep. So one other thing that I'm curious, and I don't know, have you spent a lot of time looking in Proposition 14 and what it looks like for Saratoga and Eagle Mountain? Because it looks like their tax situation and things like that will be different from ours, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I haven't dug in as hard to their feasibility study per se.
Okay.
There are a few things that I have heard and seen that really bode well for them. First of all, because they have such explosive growth, they have a very high amount of funding, state funding, coming through their weighted pupil unit, their WPU. And so, in one of the feasibility studies, it said that they would have a $27 million surplus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And when you look at bonding, you can use that surplus to put towards a bond, and now you can leverage that for additional debt. Right. Now they're able to build schools without even, going to the taxpayers. And so
when I talk to people out there, that's the thing. That's the big thing is our schools are overcrowded. We need more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and they just haven't had their needs met for so long. A lot of them outside of schools recognize that there are other student issues. There is kind of this idea occasionally that students on the east side are so much worse off than the west side. And that's just not true. There are about twice as many students on the west side who are qualifying for homeless services. Okay. Wow. There's a federal program called McKinney-Vento, and there's twice as many on the west side than there are in Orem. There are many in Orem too, but twice as many on the west side. And so when we talk about moving Title I funds around, when the west side is losing those Title I funds and they're being reallocated over to the east side, that's really significant to the students who should be receiving that support. Over on the west side, some additional things that we should talk about are property taxes. Property taxes are coming from the community. We're great up in the central area. The east side has traditionally been the leader in property tax revenues. And so, our areas are strong. It's hard on the west side because they are newer communities and they are growing. However, I have talked to city council members that are so confident that within 10 years, their property tax revenues will be what they are right now. And so in a lot of ways, what they're seeing on their feasibility studies, they just can't keep up with the growth that is coming. And so that's where they do see the trends, they do see their growth. And they just know that by the time that the new school district would start in the fall of 2027, they're going to have a totally different property tax revenue reality than what they do right now in 2024. Mm-hmm. And they're confident that that will help them, and that will just add to their budget surplus. Yeah, I don't know. There's so much, like, we can nerd out so much on the finances listening to a podcast too. But if I can just make this one point too. Again, I look carefully at the South District or the East District because part of the reason why we chose to divide into 3 smaller districts instead of just 2 is because we truly believe this is the most equitable way to do it. Okay. The city of Orem has traditionally been the number 1 tax base in Utah County.
Up until a couple of years ago.
Just barely. So Lehi and Orem are number 1 and 2 for tax-based revenues in Utah County, and not separated by a lot. Okay, that's a really important distinction. Here's the difference, though. Orem has 10,000 less students than Lehi does.
Oh, really?
Yes, and we talk about that. That's why they have smaller schools and they have smaller class sizes. And declining student enrollments. And so when you think about the math of that, if you have, just about the same tax base in revenues, but you're dividing that by 10,000 less students in Orem, what does that mean? That means you have higher per student spending capabilities. Okay. Right. Now, we're going to be fine in Central. And like I said, we have a 3% growth rate. And so our growth is increasing. But I hope that nobody looks at Orem and says, oh, poor Orem, they're really going to be bad off, because they're not. The Central area and the South or the East area are very similar. The partners, different than Prop 2 years ago, where Orem wanted to be its own district. Now they have partners. They have the city of Linden. The city of Linden pays over $2,000 more per student in funding because they have relatively few students in their city, and they have high tax revenues. They have a ton of car dealerships there. So Linden is actually this gem that nobody talks about, but they fund their students better than any other city in Utah County. You look at PG. PG has a lot of growth. They have a lot of room for growth still. If you go down, look kind of by the freeway, PG has high populations. Like, PG is an excellent partner. They're going to be great in that district. If you look at Vineyard, let's talk about Vineyard for a minute. Vineyard is tricky. They have an RDA, which means that there's not a tax contribution for a while because of some of their city's choices for businesses that they brought in. They kind of bargained for things and said, you don't have to pay us taxes. So that kind of hurts Vineyard for a little while. But what is Vineyard? Vineyard has a huge growth rate because so many young families are moving in there. So kind of like you see on the west side, Vineyard has a higher WPU that's going to continue to supplement the declining students of Orem. And so I want people to understand, truly this 3-district split is the most equitable. The Central area and the South or East area will each have 4 high schools in them. Each of them will have 1 high school that is on that FEMA seismically unsafe list. So AF High School in Central needs to be rebuilt. We'll probably have to run a bond and fix that to take care of our students and our teachers who work there. Down in the Southeast area, Pleasant Grove High School, also on the FEMA seismically unsafe list since 2006. Why has this not been fixed yet? And so, that Southeast area, they're probably going to need to run a bond, and they're going to need to fix that. And, if we were to put PG High School and AF High School into the same district, that would be very hard because now you have two schools that are redone. And that's a harder bond to pass. But in separate districts, that's doable. The community can swallow a $200 million bond and deal with that. So I hope that people truly understand, this is equitable. Lehi and Orem, they will be those tax revenue anchors. The partner communities all bring a lot and will benefit those districts, and they'll be strong.
That's cool. I was going to ask about Orem, so I'm glad you covered it. yeah, I guess one last thing is just if people want to find out more, I mean, what are good resources? I know that there's prop11utah.org.
Uh-huh. Out on the west side, there is westdistrict.ut, and that is the website for the proposed West District over with Prop 14. And they have a lot of great information. They have a lot of videos that address some of the frequently asked questions that have been brought up. So I actually use a lot of their videos to share with people when they have questions about, supporting teachers or bond ratings and things like that. Oh, it's actually westdistrict.ut.
.ut.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Oh, this is no. I see a video with Julie King on it on this one.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that one works too. Maybe westdistrict.ut lands at westdistrict.org. But yeah, I would say, we also have Facebook pages. And so, yes, on Prop 11, Utah is the Prop 11 Facebook page. There's kind of a shared Facebook page called Divide Alpine School District where, there's 500 followers that over the years have kind of been talking about this.
Right.
And then the west side has the westdistrict.ut Facebook page as well. But yeah, otherwise, I would say I encourage everyone to learn as much as they can. We hope that voters, trust their leaders. I mean, when was the last time you had 10 city councils unanimously supporting something and something that could potentially be controversial, like creating a new school district? Another really fantastic thing, the Utah County Republican Party voted to endorse this. The Utah County Democratic Party, their executive committee voted to endorse this. The Utah County Libertarian Party voted to endorse this. I don't know when those three political parties have ever agreed on anything, but it's because
we'll agree on our kids.
Yeah, it's because this isn't a referendum on the Alpine School District or teachers at all.
Right.
It's more about how can we create a new government structure to better serve our local communities. And, across the board, when we look at it as this shared government structure that needs to be changed, 14 cities being served by one school district with 85,000 students, it's not meeting the needs of everyone. And I don't know how it could. Where it can't pass bonds. So we just encourage everyone to learn as much as they can, reach out to us if they have any questions, and, look to your leaders and vote yes on Prop 11, vote yes on Prop 14, and stay involved. After that, we absolutely need the community next year electing the right school board leaders and staying involved after that to say, hey, when are we going to pass a bond? Because that's the most cost efficient way to deal with our renovations. And, the community has to stay involved all along. We believe that they will stay more involved this way.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, I just want to chime in here on some of this. I worked pretty hard to make sure that we could, as the Utah County Republican Party, endorse the split. And effectively what it comes down to, as far as things in our platform, we talk about local government, we talk about how taxes are spent, we talk about education, and all of the things that we've talked about here align with that, right? With, our concern over how our tax money is spent, our concern over our families and our kids. And so we, as the Central Committee in the Utah County Republican Party, felt like this aligned very nicely with the things that we value. And so we chose to endorse it. And so, I can't speak to the other parties. I'm assuming that they saw a lot of the same things we did, and we all care about our kids and the outcomes we get from the schools. And so, I wholeheartedly and fully endorse this kind of a split. And yeah, if you have questions, by all means, go to these websites, go join the Facebook groups, do your own research. I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't. You should just take somebody's word for it, but from what from where I'm sitting, it looks like it's the right decision. So,
absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for coming, Nikki. This was really good. And I think it really helps inform a lot of people. And even if they have more questions or, maybe some of the things we talked about, some of the concerns people have, whether they agree with us or not, at least they have something that they can go dig deeper on and figure out what's true and what they really care about.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, we're going to wrap it up here. And until next time, Max out.